How many folks have seen a .NET Rocks in person before? Oh, okay, a few hands. So, and how many listeners to .NET Rocks? Oh, even more. Excellent. Okay, well, so you're about to see the sausage being made.
Yep, that's what happens.
Right? We have editors. This guy edits the show, and so he makes us all seem very smart. But you're going to see more of the real-life version of what
I turn up the smart and turn down the suck. That's the key.
Yeah. Turns out Audition has buttons.
That's right. Less suck.
Are you good?
Yeah, I just got to... That is not the one I want.
That is not the one you want.
That is not the one I want.
Yeah, there will be.
Oh, I guess I don't need that. All right, we're good.
There we go.
Great.
And now you're alive too.
I am.
And the power's on for you?
Power's on, she's facing the right way, microphone's on the right side.
Say a few words.
I can say a few words.
Hey now, what was that?
That's a good one. I don't know what that was.
That was nice. Oh,
What's that?
Shouldn't have eaten that pizza.
Was there pizza today? Because there was every other food.
Does it all sound good mix-wise to you guys out there, or to the sound guy? Anything I should turn up or turn down? Good? Christine, one more time?
One more time.
Yeah, you sound great.
Great.
All right.
Okay. So here's what's going to happen. Because most of you have never done a live .NET Rocks. First of all, how many people listen to the show? All right, for the rest of you, it's a free podcast, and it's been around since before the word podcast. 2002 is when I started the show. He came on at show 100. Now we're up to, what is this?
1620.
1620,
Well,
wow.
1620 published.
Yeah.
We only got another 10 in the can.
Right.
Working here.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, London, it's .NET Rocks! I'm going to scream it, and I'd like you to stand up and take off your clothes and beat the person next to you and set fire to the building. Are you gay? Okay? Yeah. All right? Yeah. All right, cool.
Don't do any of that.
I'm going to turn my mic down because it's going to overload. Here we go. Hey, London! It's .NET Rocks!
Excellent.
This is a bunch of Vikings right here. Seriously, we're in London at the NDC in Westminster, and man, it's been a fun couple of days so far. We got another day to go.
Yeah.
What a great conference.
Have
We
a great
love this
time.
conference.
Yeah, there's a snow warning today, so we're about to see how London copes with snow. I mean, what could go wrong?
It couldn't be worse than Georgia.
Yeah, or Dallas. I've seen Dallas do that too. That's bad.
Right. But anyway, we started at NDC in 2008 in Oslo, and we've been coming every year since then. We've chasing them all over the globe,
Yep.
Sydney.
And we've been to all the Londons, including the one. Well, we also went to the ones in the Excel Center, which I understand is not actually in London.
Yeah.
So it's that far east.
It's pretty far.
Yeah, but it's great to be here.
It is great to be here, and you guys are a great audience, and we're looking forward to spending the next hour with you with Christine Yen. But first, we have this little matter of a bit we call Better Know a Framework. Roll the music. Isn't that awesome?
You like that?
It's in your head,
Who's
right?
singing it? I see a few of you. Yeah, it's in you. So, look, we insert the music later. All right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just burst your bubble. I get that. And you hear us talk about the music, too, on the show. It's all a lie.
So terrible.
It's completely
that
a
music.
lie.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. So here we go.
All right, buddy. That's an edit point. Like, that's why you don't hear any of these things.
Right.
So now I'm going to say again the usual way. Okay, buddy, what do you got?
Well, I went spelunking in C# 8 land, and I really like what I see.
Yeah, yesterday was like the three nice men from C# day.
Yes.
Right? Mads and John and Bill.
Yeah. And in case anyone's still living under a rock and hasn't heard, there's just a whole bunch of little nice features in C# 8. And I won't focus on the big ones, but just one little one that made my day, which is implicitly scoped using statements. Yeah? You like that?
Cool.
Bunch of heads nodding.
Yeah. On
So-
our talk show. Excellent.
So it's not it's not really a problem, but when you do a using on an object and then you immediately have to have curly braces there and indent, and then everything, you have this new scope just for this using statement.
Right.
So if you have, several disposable objects, now you're indenting so far that it doesn't line up with the rest of your code, and nobody wants to indent 10 levels deep, right?
At least with spaces, tabs don't care, but tabs are evil.
Well, in your case, you've got a monitor that stretches to Toronto.
The 43-inch, So I can handle a lot of indent.
Right. But for the most of us, indenting causes problems just with being able to keep track of where code is and all that stuff. So implicit scoping just means with whatever scope you're in, when you say using and a disposable object, you can do as many of them as you want without the curly braces, and they just go out of scope. When they go out of scope, they get disposed.
Nice.
It's like one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Geez, I wish I had that long ago.
Yeah. It's funny when those features actually appear, right?
Yeah.
Version 8, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Awesome.
So anyway, that's my tip, my C# tip of the day. Richard, is anybody talking to us today?
There are people talking to us all the time, but
What
I'm
are they
grabbing a
saying?
comment off of show 1255, so that's a little while ago. And that's the one we did with Joe Godano when we were talking about Azure Application Insights. And I know we're going to talk about instrumentation today, so I thought I would, and Christine's not been on the show before, I would have read a comment from your previous show. But you got to start somewhere. And so this is actually from February of 2016, so it's a little while ago, but instrumentation being instrumentation. And this particular comment comes from John Corner, who says, and this is 3 years ago, "Great show, guys. As a developer, whenever the question of how much data we need to do troubleshooting with, the answer is always more."
Yes.
It's kind of like how much memory SQL Server needs, right?
Yeah.
How much SQL Server needs? More.
How much do you have?
Yeah. However, there is a lot to consider in this topic, especially when it comes to privacy. Just because the technology exists to gather the data doesn't mean you have the right to it. With many of the European nations cracking down on Google and the Facebooks of the world, it's becoming very obvious that the tide is turning with regards to tracking data.
Yeah.
While tools like App Insights and Raygun provide a lot of power, with that power comes a lot of responsibility. Before just slamming a tool like this into your applications and getting all the data, make sure you understand the long-term implications of the data you are gathering. And of course, I'm always thinking about instrumenting apps here,
Right.
but it's very easy to pick up the PII, that personal identifiable information in the process.
Sure.
It's definitely an interesting topic. I'm curious to see how these tools evolve over the next few years to deal with the various legal requirements around the globe. And thanks, and keep the awesome shows coming.
We will.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, thank you so much for your comment. A copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or via Facebook. We publish every show there. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We dispose of them properly.
And I get this look on his face out there. It's like, you guys don't think I actually say that at every show, do you? Every single time we record a show, I do that bit. And it doesn't always go as smoothly as that one did.
Sometimes it ends with...
Today, it came out of me.
That's Richard Campbell for Edit Point.
Sometimes I swear. But we cut those parts out.
Right, usually.
All right.
Okay, let's introduce our guest. Christine Yen is a co-founder at Honeycomb, which builds software for engineering teams to debug production systems. Christine has built systems and products at companies large and small and likes to have her fingers in as many pies as possible. Previously, she built Parse's analytics product and leveraged Facebook's data systems to expand it, and wrote software at a few now defunct startups. I love those now defunct startups.
They're pretty great.
The streets are
Especially
littered
for
with them.
Nostalgia, it's real.
Yeah. Welcome, Christine. Give her a hand.
Now, I got to think John's comment was particularly relevant, knowing your background in getting into data. Like the current controversies around Facebook, especially. Being careful with data, being respectful with data. I think it's an interesting challenge.
It's true. I think that there's a division. It depends on the application of what you're doing with that instrumentation. Certainly, if you're not careful, you're slurping a lot of PII and you're sort of in hot water. But there's things that you can do to be intelligent about whitelists or asking good, what are the questions I really want to answer here? Where there's a lot of good practices around anonymization, constant hashing. So you can say, well, I'll take this email address. I don't need the email address.
Right.
But I want to know that this is a unique person that did these 5 things in a row.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can still gather these insights about what my unique users are doing without running the risk of storing something I'll be in trouble for later.
And I mean, when we're in the UK, which for the moment the GDPR still applies, we'll see what happens in May. But I'm also questioning this sort of good corporate governance over government regulation around responsibilities for data. Like at least we're talking about the United States, which is a much more litigious place. You could actually see people suing the company over the behavior around data, as opposed to what's happened in Europe with this set of legislations, which, in my experience so far, have not been enforced in a meaningful way. Like there hasn't been a big case of people of organizations violating the GDPR and being pursued for that.
There aren't too many people suing Facebook in the United States. That's just not probably a very smart or money-wise
Not this
proposition.
week anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious about, you're in the business of instrumentation. How do the tools really make it easy for us to do the right thing with data?
Oh, well, to be clear, the instrumentation that I'm dealing with day to day, especially building Honeycomb, is for operational data.
Right.
And there's so many useful questions that we can still be answering just saying, hey, what are the sorts of requests coming in?
Yeah.
I don't care who's running them. I don't need to track.
Geolocation matters, though.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But not all the time.
Okay.
Even just, hey, this request is coming from, the first block of the IP address.
Yeah.
Maybe that's enough. Which of my servers is it hitting? That's still enough. And it's true that instrumentation can make it easier to capture things without thinking. But I think that it's our responsibility as software engineers to always understand what the trade-offs of this thing I'm bringing in are, and how to use it well.
Yeah.
Being thoughtful about protecting people's personal information when you gather data, because I usually think folks that are just trying to understand why software isn't working as well as it should are prone, like John described, grab all the things. And hopefully we have tooling that makes it easier to say some of these things not only are not necessary, but are inappropriate.
So it sounds like you're more into the telemetry of operational data, which means how can we improve the process, right? Is that a fair assessment?
That's certainly what the product that we're selling deals with.
And that's Honeycomb?
And that's Honeycomb.
So give us the 5-minute pitch on Honeycomb.
Well, I'll give you the 2-minute pitch because I don't want to bore folks.
Okay.
Honeycomb is for software engineers to understand what's happening with your production systems now.
Okay.
And we really find folks who come to us when their dashboards can't quite answer what they're looking for. They see a spike and they're like, but why?
Right.
And we're building a new tool to help folks get the flexibility and power and speed that they would love to get out of their logs and existing dashboards and just can't because of existing tools. So that's the sort of, our customers usually use us for telemetry of their what's happening with their servers. In being in sort of an engineering and product role, do look at a lot of product analytics for our users to figure out, how to build things, what they're building, or how to build things, and what use cases we're solving for. And for that, we only have to solve the privacy issue for ourselves.
Right.
We just have to think about what we're comfortable storing about our users, what we're comfortable being able to mine, and where we might have to clean up our data if someone requests it.
Right.
So-
You actually look at it.
So you're looking at, you start with just basic logs and can figure out a whole bunch of stuff based on just patterns that you understand. How customizable are these things, and do your customers always understand what they can or should customize, or what data they may or may not be able to track?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I think one of the questions that we always ask them when kind of engaging in a new account is, what are the problems you're trying to solve?
Yeah.
Right? Because that should be driving the data that you're capturing.
What questions do you want answers to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's the classic data of just like, how fast are things going? Are things reliable? Why do we get an unstable performance spike? Those class of problem where the correct answer is always find it, fix it, and as long as those numbers ever get that high again, you're happy.
Right.
In some ways, those are kind of easy metrics. I mean, actually diagnosing the problem is hard. You spend more time doing diagnostics. Once you've nailed it down, the fix is usually not that big of a deal.
Exactly. Someone used the phrase real-time forensics recently
Right.
to describe what we try to enable, and that's absolutely true. It's the forensics of, I know something is wrong, and I know that when I find it, I'll be able to fix it. But how do I figure out when something is happening, and where, and for whom, and under what conditions?
And that's going to happen at all layers too, right? I mean, trying to instrument JavaScript, for example, under production when the problem only happens at a certain, in a
Peak
certain
load.
condition. That's tough stuff.
Can you imagine trying to solve the sorts of forensics problems given all the different browser versions and all of the extensions that someone might have running? It's crazy. And the folks, we talk to folks who try to use traditional dashboarding tools to solve these sort of front-end issues, and they're just like, oh, we've just given up.
We don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And often that sort of demographic data about what does the client machine look like, what is the version of the browser, what plugins there play, can narrow the scope dramatically. It's like, this is only happening 2% of the cases, but it's in every case of this version of the browser on this operating system. I've even run into a case where it's like, at this resolution of screen, you had a problem. But once we knew that was the consistent demographic, like that was the one consistent pattern in this problem, then it's like, well, we have a chance of reproducing because we're now looking at that particular issue.
I can imagine that the different versions of browsers is a problem, but it's become less of a problem since they all started updating every time you reload them. But so you got to be pretty hardcore to have your Chrome open through an entire update cycle or two, and the answer is, hey, restart your browser, right?
This is true, but having tried to support a very complex JavaScript app on Firefox can still be quite a hassle.
Yeah.
Sorry for any Firefox users out there.
No, I use
feel
it.
the pain.
I use it because my, Chrome just sort of, I don't know, it just became less joyful for me.
It's fair.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, whose machine doesn't automatically start 30 copies of Chrome now?
I know. You look at the task manager sometimes. You guys want fun.
Every single
What are
time
you
you say
doing?
yes to notifications, that's another copy of Chrome.
I love the example, though, of browser size and browser version and all these things as examples of super useful identifying information that isn't personal.
Right, yeah.
Right.
It's absolutely helpful for tracking down a problem. It is absolutely, people can get so creative about what are the sorts of things that would help me find an issue that have nothing to do with your email address or your IP address.
No.
Sure.
Yeah, and I do describe it as demographic data because it is a descriptor of the user. It's just not a personal descriptor of the user, but it is aspects of how that application runs. And it's all you're hearing is descriptions of a bleeding that I've done over the years, finding these different things. One of the things I wanted to get into this show, and I think it was related to the talk you did earlier as well, is using this kind of telemetry to measure how new features are used and whether they're good. Do you ever get into that?
All the time. Honestly, so I want to tell a story. I just had coffee this afternoon with one of our customers over at GeckoBoard, and they're a very data-driven company, so they have this culture already, always of let's test something out, experiment, see how it does. And they were describing wanting to build a new feature that they knew was important, that they knew their customers were asking for, but not being sure what the right algorithm to use was.
Right.
They knew what they wanted the end result to be. They knew they were solving essentially an NP-complete problem. And they were like, okay, we have a few different approaches we'll implement. And what they did was they implemented they implemented
Turns out writing the
versions of all
code's
of
not
them.
the hard part.
Right.
Doing the right thing's the hard part.
Right. And so they're able to run all of them in parallel, throw away the results after sending it to Honeycomb.
Right.
And so they were able to, in real time, in very descriptive visualizations, find out, okay, well, how would algorithm A have performed versus B? Are we happy with that? Would our customers be happy with that?
Right.
And there's so many things that you can do to help drive the decision of how do I want to do this?
Were they
Is
running
this
all the
worthwhile?
algorithms on each of a given request? So it's like, this is the one request, here's 4 versions of the algorithm executed on it.
I think they were.
That's really interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's like it's a form of A/B testing, but it's an A/B testing of in a really detailed way that would be.
But
awesome
also
to see
very
more of.
internal, right? Like you're not a really, I've certainly run into this with some software, especially stuff like recommendation engines, where it's like, we've deployed it, but we didn't show it to the user, but we used the user data to see how it would behave. And the big thing we were looking at, because no way we ever found to make a recommendation engine that didn't have significant overhead, is how much more gear, and that's get a sense of how old this was, it was pre-cloud, how much more gear we're going to need to buy and still be able to maintain performance. Right? Nobody was angry at the developers that this had overhead. It had overhead, but it was being able to test it in the field and know the real numbers before we deployed so that we could scale up sufficiently so that the day it did roll out, we didn't tip the site over.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, this idea of we test benchmarking your new features against live operations and, on some subset of the current executing set, and then sort of looking at them, is a very interesting way to think. It's all about the telemetry, though. Like, how do you measure which one is better? Is it just speed?
In that case, they had their own goals, and I think the important part always for these experiments is defining your measure of success first.
Sure.
Right. Otherwise, you're just gathering data, and you're like, well, I guess I'll sift through it later. But I mean, the best experiments. There's a reason we have the scientific method. You come up with a hypothesis first. You're like, this is what I want to find out about this, and then you run the experiment, and then you can move on.
There's a real strong psychological aspect to the hypothesis as well, which is we are not presuming an outcome per se. We're saying these are the metrics we believe are important, and we're hoping one of these will be significant one way or the other.
Right.
And you don't know which one's going to return the best numbers.
Absolutely.
You just got to try and agree that like these are the things we want to measure.
So what layers and technologies does Honeycomb have telemetry for? I mean, there's so many things that you could be measuring, all the way from a SQL server or a database of any kind to, all the way down to the browser.
Right now, we focus primarily on the application layer, and honestly, we are still building up our library of all the different integrations we could provide, but we started out by giving the developers more freedom, because ultimately, what your software is trying to do. You know the things that are interesting, and so we want to give people the flexibility to say, well, today I care about screen size. I care about how fast this rendered. I care about what other extensions or feature flags they had enabled when they were experiencing this.
And so you're deploying code into the app to be part of the telemetry process? So these are libraries that we have to the product?
Yes, we have their libraries that you can use to build up events and then emit them to Honeycomb.
Because the comment I read was about App Insights, which is sort of an external tool that Azure provides. But for me, when I wear my IT hat, like that's great telemetry for me because it talks more in terms of outside of the app. The internal app telemetry is a very different creature. I mean, developers have to sort of decide, what are we measuring here?
I think maybe our definition of in-app and external to app are. I don't think I think about that quite as with quite as clear of a dividing line.
Okay.
Ultimately, if you're an app developer, or you're a developer on the business logic of your application, you could be capturing insights about how people are using your application, as well as internal things like memory usage or something else about the actual operation of the app.
Well, a lot of those things are getting externally measurable, right?
Right.
In a runtime language like .NET, it's very easy for us to intercept at each calling stack point and say, I don't need to know anything about a given call to know when that call began and when it ended. And so, I can get good telemetry on that. Where as soon as I get a developer involved, they could actually choose to drop data points within an execution block. That would be, I don't know of any other way you could pull that off.
Well, and hopefully you'd be able to keep that code out of the way, using AOP or sort of attaching outside in a sidecar, in a container, that kind of thing, so that so it doesn't impact the development process too much.
That'd be ideal.
Is that where you guys live in that world too, or?
We would ideally live at the AOP layer, but there are things that live in the logic of your app, which if you're a platform, which customer this is. If you're a retailer, which say you're a company like Shopify, which storefront the request is being is in. These are things that are often necessary for tracking down a problem or localizing, debugging the issue, that are only going to be inside the application, that can't be slurped out automatically by something like App Insights.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It's like intentional metrics as opposed to, I'm not going to say arbitrary metrics, but metrics from the perimeter,
Yeah.
really, as opposed to we're digging into
And
specific
things that you can turn on and turn off, you
Yeah.
know, from a single switch.
Yeah, once we get into that sort of DevOps-y, we got a bunch of feature flags here. We're going to experiment with different versions, which all of that stuff I love, but I think it's a lot of more work to make sure you instrument that well.
It can be.
Probably worthwhile.
Yeah.
So here's an activity I used to do back when I did real work, which admittedly was a while ago. We'd ship a new version of the app, and I would spend the next 2 weeks after the app went out the door studying log files. And I was really looking for two things. First is the new feature that we built, is anybody using it? And second is that new feature killing us? Like on more than one occasion, we'd had the experience where we shipped out a feature, people really liked it, but it stressed the system so much it literally tipped it over. But it'd been telling us in log files for days that it was going to do that. We just weren't looking. And you only have to, when you're responsible, you only get burned by that once, and you're like, we should look. Right? But I also found, for me as a leader of a team, when I could write up a report 2 weeks after we shipped a version and said, hey, remember that great thing that we pitched so hard on making? We got it out the door on this day. This many people have used it this many times. Like sort of having an impact report on a new feature that wasn't anecdotal, that was actually an analysis of here's how this new feature got used. And I just don't know how many folks do that. And and I would hope that the new tooling, this stuff you guys build, would make that easier.
I think that more and more folks are doing that as data-driven cultures and data-driven engineering teams are becoming more vocal and more widespread. And I almost hesitate to say this because we're in a crowd of engineers, but I feel like product managers almost talk about this more than engineers.
I would totally agree, because ultimately you are measured on and should be measured on utilization. And I think often in development, it's like once I've shipped it, I kind of don't want to think about it anymore. I'm working on the next thing.
Right. We just want to write code, right? Just leave me alone. Yeah, okay, I'll put that line of code in there to measure your stuff.
But I mean, one of the reasons I got good at getting more money for my team was being able to show the value of what my team built.
Absolutely.
And so I got sort of pulled into writing those stories of why our features were great, so that when I turned around and said, we want to build this, and this is the kind of value we think we're going to bring to it, I could get the money. I could get the additional team members.
One of the things that we always try to do at the start of any of our projects is define the success metrics at the end of it.
Sure.
Those are almost always, from the perspective of we're gonna build this thing. It's almost always we want these many people to use it. We want this to. We're building this because we think it's correlated with, or it'll drive engagement, or it'll drive adoption inside this organization. So we want to see these not go down for folks who are active with this feature.
Right.
And there's so many things that you can do to know that, okay, this thing that we shipped, did it solve a problem?
Yeah.
Or did we flub it?
Well, one of the most dreadful things is 2 weeks into a feature shipped it, nobody's touched it.
Yep.
Like it's just, and then you're just like, well, why? Like they actually do the analysis. Like, does nobody know it's there? Oh, we didn't actually turn it on? Here's a good reason. like I've had those experiences where it's like, if you're not watching that thing, boy, talk about messing up with your value. We spent 6 weeks developing that feature and nobody touched it.
Yep.
And Christine, I got to interrupt for just a moment for this very important message. And we're back. It's Richard Campbell with Carl Franklin. We're here at NDC London. And we just had a great commercial break.
Yeah, we did.
And everybody just saw a little more sausage being made.
That's right.
And we're here with Christine Yee.
Yen.
And let me say that again. And we're here with Christine Yen, talking a little bit about instrumentation and about this idea of really measuring the effects of new features and value. Because the other aspect of this is when they're not using it, or they're using it sufficiently, like is it a good time to go back as a product manager and say, how do we make this better? We actually saw this Gabriel Torok show we did, where they were instrumenting mobile apps and showing that some features were just too hard to use. They started tracking the time click to click through a feature stream, that's really interesting instrumentation, saying, wow, it's taking a long time and a lot more clicks than we thought for using this feature.
I just recently learned of a JavaScript library that uses the webcam to track your eye movement. And how cool is that? First of all, you got to convince your user, hey, we'd like to track your eye movement while you use our, while you order some salami from salami.com or whatever. that is the challenge. But if you can get people in a focus group, perhaps maybe to just use your application, there's some telemetry right there. You can find out where they're looking, why they can't find the buy button. You know,
I'm pretty sure there's whole startups around that topic.
Screen
Startup for
blind
everything.
is a really interesting phenomenon, right? I've
Yeah.
certainly seen, most people are now trained to look at nothing on the right side of a web page. They just
That's right.
don't even see it. Well, we battle this on our website. It's like
do.
putting up a thing about, sign up for this or do something. You put it on the right, nobody clicks on it.
and guess where all the ads are on our show, on our site? On the right.
Yeah.
Still,
Still,
they are.
we're not saying we're not aware of it. We just don't care.
The good part about tracking something and knowing no one is using it is knowing also when you can deprecate something.
Right. Turn a
Right.
feature off.
Favorite thing to do, removing
Yeah.
code.
See, I used to do that with a different kind of instrumentation. I would shut it off and wait for the screams. You hear screams, okay, I'll turn it back on. Sorry.
It's when you want the phone to ring.
Yeah.
Just turn the server
Feel a little
off.
lonely, yeah. That's the nature of IT, right? Because you do your job perfectly, nobody could tell. Shut a server off, everybody could tell.
Yeah, it's like, hey, good to hear from you.
Try it again. Do you run into customers now that are at the point where they are looking at the telemetry of utilization to shape next features or to make that kind of feature thinking?
I think that shaping next features is a little bit more in the realm of product, and I think that is less of a common use case for Honeycomb right now.
I mean, it's just an interesting idea of, telemetry is typically for IT. Are we up? Are we down? Are we fast? Somewhat for dev, stuff being used. Is it working the way expected? Why is it erratic? How are we debugging it? But telemetry for product managers.
Well, it's an iterative process, right? So you put something out there, you test it out, and you get the telemetry back, and you get informed by that. And maybe sometimes the information says, oh, this feature has to change, or we need another feature that does this because that didn't work. So I can see that happening.
The delightful thing about telemetry for product managers is that they can often use the same telemetry that developers are using.
Sure.
Hey, we just shipped this feature. Is this endpoint getting hit? Right?
Yeah.
That's certainly a sign that people care. And I feel like the role that, if not telemetry and instrumentation, but at least data can tell you is how, I feel like when you're building features, the question is never, what do we build? Because everyone has ideas about what
Sure.
could be built. It's how do we prioritize
Yeah.
this? And what data can tell you and how data can inform that is, well, between these two features, maybe one is targeted for power users, one is targeted more for getting folks
Novice users,
board.
first
Yeah.
time around.
you can then look at your telemetry, you can look at your analytics and say, well, where do we want to focus right now?
Sure.
Of the folks in this surface area, are more of them more of them power users? If they are they using it in a way that we're excited about?
Right.
Cool, yes, okay, let's invest in this power user feature.
So the difference between using a mouse and caring about tool tips because you're a novice versus I know all the shortcut keys. We could measure that and say, hey, this many people are using shortcut keys. We pretty much should put them in the expert class as they even know those. There's probably some fairly experienced users who don't even know the keys.
Definitely.
I also like this idea of not asking someone, are you an expert, are you a novice, but rather looking at their behavior and saying, can you categorize them that way?
Looking at the data to back up, looking at data to back up qualitative information is my
Yeah.
favorite thing, right?
Yeah,
'Cause you'll have, and this is the unflattering way to put it is everyone lies. The flattering way to put it is some people want, they ask for the faster horse because they don't know that you're going to build a car.
Sure.
And looking at their usage patterns, looking at what parts of your product or what parts of your tool that they've used and are familiar with, helps you understand where they're coming from and helps you make those decisions. How seriously do I take this feedback?
Yeah.
Well, and you want to believe that we have vision around our software in the first place, that going in a particular direction. But I kind of like the idea of the visionary of a piece of software, also breaking that down into a series of hypotheses that we could then test with telemetry and say, you believe that people want to do X. We've built these things this far. This is what they're actually doing with it.
What's the biggest thing most people miss? Do wrong. Or don't do. Or do when they shouldn't.
I think that people think of instrumentation as this giant hurdle they have to get right or spend a bunch of time building up. And instead, and then once it's done, they put it on a shelf and they're like, great, we've got everything instrumented, we're done. And that's such a high bar to set for yourself that lots of people are like, oh, okay, well, that's nice, but I can't do it. I don't have time. I've got other fires burning over here.
Right.
And instead, instrumentation is something that should be as much a part of writing code as documentation and testing. It's how you know that your code is still doing what it should be doing after the test phase.
Right.
And it's something that evolves with your code. And so
Right.
people, the same way you don't write all of your tests up front. You write some tests up front, but you don't do all of them. You add a little bit of instrumentation in order to answer the questions that you have. Don't worry about the questions you'll have tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, that's sage advice right there. Don't try to predict the future.
But also to sort of get in the mindset of I don't build a feature that I can't measure the results of.
Yeah.
Right. So that otherwise, well, how do we know that we're building anything relevant? So the telemetry's just got to be part of that. It's the only real agnostic feedback mechanism. It's got the least amount of bias.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me to sort of think through that and think how different software can be. A lot less guessing that you're building the right thing and a lot more measuring. Although when it goes wrong, you're still going to be plenty of debate about why it's not what you expected. You don't automatically get an answer to all of those questions.
One of my favorite things that we do is we use Honeycomb and we instrument from essentially a product perspective, and we're tracking user interactions with our UI. So we'll notice, okay, they open this dialogue, and then do they hit cancel or do they hit OK to do the action?
Right.
And by looking at that and by comparing trends, by being able to break down by, okay, well, we'll filter out these users and we'll filter in these users, you can start to understand where folks drop off and what they're running into. Okay, if they're not completing the action, did they even find it?
Yeah.
Right.
Or they didn't know where to go from there?
At a point. Can I ask the AV guy or some guys in the house to bring me a power adapter with a USB mini cable? Because this thing is dropping bars.
You run out of power.
I don't want it to run out. And it was completely charged.
Anybody got double A's on them?
I've got double A's.
Great.
4. I need 4.
Can we borrow 4? Actually, I don't want to borrow them. I want to keep them because giving them back drain to you is really not useful. But if you wouldn't mind, that was a simple solution to the problem.
All right. Thanks. So we might as well just keep talking until
Yeah, until the batteries make it to the front.
Yep.
Where are we?
Where are we?
What did
Yeah,
you
where
do?
Let me just ask you, where can we go with this conversation? Is there any meatballs that I can throw at you you can knock out of the park?
I really like the example. When we talked a little bit about this session, you were talking about how designers and how vision fits in with data. And I really liked that question because, you mentioned vision.
Yep.
Yes, there should always be a vision. There should always be.
Let Carl seg you on that.
Okay.
Because you're already doing it.
Okay.
And here come the batteries, so we might as well
We're going to
just
need to stop and start.
All right, hang on one second.
Don't switch it off yet, man. Since we're on.
Do you know the seg?
Yeah, it was about designers, right?
But intuition versus data.
All right. So Richard was talking about designing and designers having intuition versus data, and how does that play into telemetry?
I love the two play off of each other so well, right? Because when you're building something, when you're picking which features to add, there's got to be a vision. There's got to be someone who sees far in the future, past the things you haven't built yet, guiding folks in that direction. But even after you've said, okay, we want to build the ability to do this, there's so much fleshing out and shaping that needs to happen. And so a designer can say, okay, well, it should look like this. And then an engineer or a product manager, whatever, someone very data oriented can go, okay, well, let's look at what people are currently doing. Let's, okay, you have this text field. How long are the text fields how long are the strings that people are currently sending? Okay, you want to support this flow. Is this something that we want to support? And it can be hard because ultimately you can only measure what you have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? And
So there is a natural confirmation bias there.
There's a natural confirmation bias. And so sometimes intuition has to override data.
Sure.
Oh, well, no one's using this. Well, that's because it's crappy.
But how would you know when intuition is correct unless you had intuition?
Oh, don't get all curses on me. This is what happens when we do functional programming shows before we talk about design.
Well, you know, it reminds me of the guys who invented Ren and Stimpy. They were interviewed by a radio station, and it was after they had just gone viral, right? Back in the TV days. And he said that the producers wanted to know, they wanted to do these focus groups with kids, so they spent like $200,000 to bring in all these kids and showed them different things, and basically they confirmed what the artists knew all along, that kids like butt jokes. $200,000 to tell me that a kid likes butt jokes, right? So some things are blatantly obvious, but other things are subtle and not so obvious. So the question is real. I mean, how does your engineer person know when to sort of cede the battle to the intuitives and say, I'll go along with your gut instinct?
I will say first that sometimes, I think we all have to accept that sometimes we're wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes the intuition is wrong, sometimes the data lies to us. But when it comes to ceding to someone else's intuition, ultimately it's a leap of faith, right?
Right.
It's a leap of faith, and sometimes it's, I will believe you, but then I will measure it.
Yeah, measure it.
And then I will
Exactly.
make sure that I not to make the same mistake again if you're wrong this time.
Yeah. That's it. That's the answer.
But I
Go
also
ahead.
think, again, I think we said this earlier, and I hope people agree, it's like code's relatively cheap. I think you could spend more time arguing about a feature than it takes to code both versions, get it out there and try it. I have had the experience
test it.
with an extraordinary developer, a guy like Kent Alsted or something, where there's like 4 of us in a room arguing over a feature, and he's sitting at the end of the table
And
just
he's done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we weren't finished the argument when he pulled out the USB key and said, shall we take them both out for a spin?
I've been that guy. I used to make everybody mad because
Just
of
write the
Hey,
code."
try this.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
just write the code. But I also think that could be really fun, right? It's a little less conjecture and theorizing and debate and more, let's go collect data
Yeah.
by having the tool to do it.
I love the cultural change that can happen when you shift into being willing to experiment more. People's egos get less tied up in it. It's okay. Well, let's try it, and let's not pour too much angst into it. But let's try it a little bit and see where we go.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, see which one actually works out. And again, if you decide those metrics and things ahead of time, then I think it also sucks more ego out of it. That it's just like, well, this is what the number said. I do like instrumentation tools, especially ones around capturing errors and things, because the effect of looking at a detailed error message from a reporting tool means there's nobody typed it out. It's not a bug report anymore. This came from production. We can hate production. We don't want to hate people, like the person who wrote up the bug report.
Right.
So it's like, it almost externalizes it when you can have data like that, so that we're all on the same side of a problem, looking at the data going, wow, how did that happen?
Well, who was the idiot that wrote this report?
Well, it's
developed it.
It's also it's the thing that helps you get past someone writing, your service isn't working.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, how is it not working? Why is it not working? Give me something to work with. And when you can pair that with, okay, well, these are the requests that were associated with this user. This is how they failed. These are the things that were turned on along the way. You're like, oh, okay, now I have a better view of reality. And it's the qualitative and the quantitative having to work together.
Sure.
I told this story on .NET Rocks before, but I'll tell it to this audience because it was years ago. I had a customer, and it was a web app, and I had been coding until 3 o'clock in the morning, and I finally just went to sleep. And there wasn't any dev test stage. I mean, it was live on the metal, and he liked to show people the site while I was in the middle of developing. So 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm barely awake, he calls me, and he says, I go, what's up? He goes, Carl, it doesn't work. And I said, can you be a little more explicit? It's 9 o'clock in the morning. He goes, it doesn't fucking work.
That's more explicit.
Gee, thanks. I'll get right on that.
Yeah, you'll want a little more measurement than that.
Yeah.
A little bit more information on that. I also look at this as sort of 2 ways to slice data. Like you were describing a scenario type slice where it's like, here is the activity of a given user and all of the steps they took. So that horizontal slice through the system. Because most instrumentation, in my mind, tends to be very vertical. Here is the average request time for this service. Here is the, and here's like the worst, and here's the best, like those kinds of things that say, sort of the instability of a given service. But that's a very different measurement from a user's experience.
It's true. And my thesis is that good data tools let you do both on the same data, right? Especially if you have the data in the horizontal state. It's 2019.
It is 2019.
It's 2019. We have all this great software, all these great approximation algorithms or analytical engines. We can calculate the best or the worst off that raw data, fast, real time, with whatever kind of specificity we want today. So we should be able to do both.
Yeah.
Because it depends, as always, on the question that we're asking. Do we want to find outliers? Then ask the sorts of questions that'll let us pull out outliers. Do we care about something specific? Then we look there.
Are you starting to experiment on the machine learning side with having tools that help us derive more information from this data?
No to the first, yes to the latter.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm from Silicon Valley. My knee-jerk reaction to the term machine learning is, you just wanted some fairy dust on your application.
Yes.
Right,
Can I squirt this with AI fairy dust and it will be worth more?
Yes. So, for the latter part, there are always really cool statistical things that we can do to help folks figure out that first question of something is wrong, where do I look?
Right.
Something we built recently with Danielle Fisher, actually joined us recently from Microsoft Research. And one of the features he worked on this fall was precisely that. Okay, I'm mapping the distribution of latencies, or I'm mapping some sort of distribution, and I can see there's some strange artifact in the corner. Latency has gone up, and I don't know why. Why? Right? That's the question that happens all the time when you're staring at a dashboard and scratching your head. And this is a great example of data versus intuition, because the interaction that he wanted was being able to look at this heat map and circle those points and say, what might be causing this, right? Of all of these attributes that we're capturing, which attribute is correlated with this increase? Like how can I start isolating the cause of this? But the problem was that heat map visualization, judging by the data, was something that not everyone used.
Right.
It was something that some folks had trouble reading. They liked the line graphs. They didn't want to see the whole distribution of over time. But Danielle was like, okay, this is still the right place to start. First, because it's the place where statistically we can, it's easiest to highlight a particular region of the heat map. But also because the value of what we can provide, if we start with this and we enable this interaction, will be so much higher, and we'll actually go back and drive usage of this particular visualization.
Right.
And we built it, we released it as an experiment, and we saw that it did. In fact, more people were using the initial visualization and getting value out of it, that it became this virtuous cycle that we wouldn't have been able to get past if we'd simply said, well, people aren't using this visualization enough, they won't get value out of it, we can't build
Stop
it.
working on it.
Right.
So the intuition is really like, we're not doing a good enough job providing value in that visualization yet.
Yeah.
Which I think is a harder thing to say. It's way easier to blame the customer for being incompetent.
And the thing is, we especially in the data space, we know, judging from the keynote yesterday, we're drowning in data.
Sure.
There's never a problem. There's often not a problem of, I need more data. It's how do I start working with this data? And so the more that tools can start to nudge you in the right direction and say, hey, something interesting is over here, and this one attribute seems like you might want to dig into it a little bit more. That's the role that good tools can play.
And you don't have to do machine learning for that. Straight up good old-fashioned stats will help you there too.
Are you a fan of R?
I've heard enough horror stories from folks who have scars from R that I can't say that I'm a fan, but I'm a fan of what R has enabled the industry to do. I love the sorts of conclusions and research and the culture that R has driven by just asking folks to look at data and run fun experiments.
Yeah.
I should dig into it.
Are we done?
I think so.
Okay. Well, Christine, thank you very much for joining us for this hour. It's been enlightening.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Hey, let's give it up for Christine Yan. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks!
Well, that